speaker, Sister Sunu, and Lord, may the words of the heart, the meditation of the heart be acceptable to you. So I thank you for all you do in Jesus' name. Amen. Yeah, Daniel chapter 7. I mean, it was great. We started looking at that picture in heaven where Jesus was coming into the presence of God, and the angels and the books were opened.
Yes.
And then the scene moved from heaven to more of an earthly judgment scene. And Daniel was seeing these things and not believing them. In the end, it tells us there that he had to look to the angel and say, help. And the angel explained that, what the horns meant, these were various kingdoms. But Daniel was really interested because there was this little horn.
Yes.
And that came up between the 10 horns, uprooted 3 of them. And Daniel said as he looked, it had eyes and it was speaking blasphemous words. I don't know whether we really looked at that, but blasphemy is when we're speaking against God. And within the Bible there are specific ways that we can understand. But that's probably a different sermon. Different sort. But then this little horn, it said that he made war against God's people. But he also thought to change times and laws. And I think that's probably where we're going to go this evening.
Yes, exactly.
So as we leave Daniel chapter 7, we're going to move into the New Testament, to the book of Revelation.
Yes, absolutely. So I think yesterday when we concluded, we realised that this little horn that had eyes and a mouth and was speaking these pompous things was actually sounding like Lucifer, who we said towards the beginning, how he kind of went against God's law, how sin was found in him. So that's the kind of spirit that this little horn power kind of showed. So, like I said, we're going to leave Daniel. We're going to go into the book of Revelation. So we'll be reading from Revelation, chapter 13, verse 1 to 8. Revelation chapter 13, verses 1 to 8. And if we pay really close attention, some things are going to start popping out.
And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, and his seat, and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world wandered after the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, on which gave power unto the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast, who is able to make war with him? And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things, and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, and his tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints, and to overcome them. And power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world.
That's right. Okay, so a lot of things are starting to pop up in Revelation chapter 13. So we're going to kind of outline some of those things. So Daniel chapter 7 talks about these beasts that were coming out of the sea. And there's this one specific beast in Daniel chapter 30 that's also coming out from the sea.
Yes.
So that's the first thing to remember, is that this beast rises from the sea. The second is that it has the components of the beasts that are mentioned in Daniel chapter 7. Would you like to remind us, Pastor, of what that was?
Well, when I was looking at this, I was thinking, this beast, it says, and I saw it had unto a leopard. Well, in Daniel chapter 7, it talks about a leopard with four heads.
Yes.
And the wings of a fowl.
Yes.
And it then says it had the feet as of a bear.
Mm-hmm.
And it talks about a bear that's raised up on one side.
Yes.
And then it has a mouth of a lion. And the lion was the lion with wings that received a man's heart.
Yes, that's right. So you can see here the whole beast in Daniel chapter 7 is actually components of this beast is now in this beast in the Revelation. I just think it's fascinating that there's two books that are completely opposite and written in different times, and yet they both have very similar characteristics that can be found. So this beast that comes out of the sea, it doesn't just have its own authority. It's something else that gives it its authority. And we can read in verse 4 that it's the dragon that gives this beast its authority. When you think about dragon, what kind of things come into mind?
Well, you asked that, but for me, my thought is always the previous verse, chapter 12 and verse 9, and it says, and the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan.
Right.
Which is Lucifer, which you were talking about yesterday.
Absolutely. So this dragon is actually the same guy that we were talking, the same anointed cherub that we were talking about yesterday. So that's the beast, or it's a dragon that gives this beast its power and its authority. So
yeah, I was going to say, it's interesting because it talks about that great dragon, the old serpent, and they have a particular meaning within the Bible context. A dragon is a destroyer. It goes around destroying, destruction.
Yes.
A serpent is a deceiver.
Yes.
And these are very much in line with Lucifer, who wants to destroy. He wants power.
Absolutely.
But he will do it through deception.
Deception, absolutely. So it's right what Daniel 7 was saying, that it sounds a bit like it's Lucifer. That's what it is. So if we move on, I believe it's I think it's in verse 3 that it mentioned that it received a deadly wound.
Yes.
Yes. So that's another thing that we want to remember, is that this beast receives a deadly wound, and we're going to probably look into that a bit later. The other thing that we need to remember is it's a very strong political power that actually comes about. And that's described in verse 3 and verse 7. It says it was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. So he has a lot of power and a lot of authority. And also he's a religious power, because it says that all who dwell on the earth will worship him. So again, worship is coming back into play here.
Which is what you said about Lucifer,
yes,
wanted worship.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can see here that this beast is very much looking for both, it's a combination of politics as well as religion that come together to kind of give it its authority. The other thing is that it speaks blasphemous words, and that's in verse 1, verse 5 and verse 6. So it talks about how it speaks, obviously,
yes,
and it speaks blasphemy against God. The next thing is that it wars with the saints of God. That's found in verse 7. It says that it was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And verse 8, it says that it has a very mysterious number. Verse 18, sorry. So Revelation 13, verse 18,
yes.
It says, here is the wisdom. Let him who has understanding circulate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. So,
666.
Exactly. Now, that number has been thrown about everywhere. I think people are very scared of that number because obviously it's known to be associated with beast. So, yeah, so that's where we're at with Revelation chapter 30. So, we can kind of see that there's a lot of similarities found down in chapter 7, that's also found here in Revelation chapter 13. So, what the first thing we kind of want to unplug is, what is the sea? What does the sea represent?
Well, I think if we go to Revelation, as we're in there, Revelation chapter 17 and verse 5, 15, yes. Revelation 17 verse 15. And here's an angel speaking to, in this case, it's not Daniel, it's John, the author of Revelation. And he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest where the whore sitteth are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues.
Right. So we can kind of see here that the sea actually represents people. People from all nations, all tribes, all tongues. So this beast that came out of the sea is actually saying that the beast came out of land where there's lots of people. So that's kind of what that is insinuating. Now, we already went over the fact that it's a composite of the 4 beasts of Daniel 7. So it's the lion-like beast, the bear-like beast, the leopard, and the 10-horned beast. And this beast is a combination of all of them. So Daniel chapter 7 talks about this power, which is we know as the Antichrist. So we need to kind of find out who is the Antichrist and kind of what is it that they promote or teach.
And I'm sure that is of real interest to our viewers.
Yes.
But who is the Antichrist?
Yes.
That's something that, as a Christian, people always ask me that question. Who is the Antichrist?
Absolutely. And I think it's probably a study for another time, because we didn't really delve into Daniel chapter 7 itself yesterday, which actually tells us that the Antichrist is the papacy. Okay. So what we probably will do in the future is, when we have these sessions again, actually go into that and kind of figure out how did we come to that kind of conclusion. But based on that is where we're going to move forward from now. Right. So the papacy came about from the Roman power. So Rome was a political power that existed, especially during Christ's first advent. And then once their power started to kind of diminish, the papacy actually took over, so it came out of pagan Rome. Okay. So you have pagan Rome and then papal Rome that come after. Yes. So even though they claimed to be Christian, a lot of their foundation was still very much from the pagans.
So we're not talking about individual people here,
no,
we're just talking about the organisation.
Absolutely, and I believe that there are sincere people in that organisation that probably worship God and are very sincere in how they worship God, but obviously the papacy itself stands for something that is pretending to be Christ, but that isn't. Okay. And the way we can find that out is by what it kind of does. It says that it persecuted the saints of God. Okay. So, I think it says in verse, I believe, where it talks about 42 weeks. Okay,
in verse...
42 months. It's verse 5, yes. So it says, it was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. Now, we read something very similar about times in Daniel 7. And it was talking about times, and half time, which is actually 3.5 years, which is actually 42 months. So in terms of prophecy and where we stand on that, the way we interpret Bible prophecy.
Shall I just explain to our listeners, within the Jewish system, there would only be 360 days in a Jewish year, and then every 5 or 6 years they would have an extra month to build up those. So when we're looking at prophecy, when it's talking about a year, it is 360 days. And within Daniel, it talks about a time which is 1 year, times which is 2 years, and a dividing of time which is half a year, which, as you rightly said, is 3.5 years, which is 42 months.
According to the Jewish
calendar.
Absolutely.
And then the Bible also talks about a day as a year, and that you'll find in Numbers and Ezra. And so when we're looking at these, we're not looking at 42 literal months. We're looking at 42, which would be 1,260 days. So it would be 1,260 years, which is 42 months or 3.5 years.
Yes, exactly. So this power, or the papacy, was established and did run, but it would specifically blaspheme and persecute the saints for that amount of time. And there's only one power that ever did that in the history of humanity, and that was the Roman Catholic Church, especially during the middle of the Dark Ages. So we can kind of see here that they were pretending or claiming to be the Son of God or the presence of God on earth, but they obviously were persecuting the saints of God because they did kill a lot of people during those years. So it does say, Revelation chapter 12 talks about the woman, and the woman is described as the Church of God. So it identifies who the dragon is, and it talks about God's end-time church as a pure woman.
And just for the sake of our viewers, there's a couple of references, and obviously we're going through very quickly on this.
Trying to kind of get them all
in Jeremiah chapter 6 verse 2 and 2 Corinthians 11 verse 2, they're both describing a woman and a church. So we're thinking there that when it's talking about a woman, and within Bible prophecy, there's two types of women. There's the pure woman, and then there's the adulterous woman. So you've got the pure church and the adulterous church, which is the Antichrist.
Yes, absolutely. So you can see in Revelation chapter 12 that the dragon actually wants to make war with this woman. So he drives her into the wilderness. That's what Revelation chapter 12 is talking about. And that correlates with the Church of God during this time period when papal Rome was persecuting the saints, and they were in hiding at the time. So that's kind of the gist of what's going on there. So there are some quotes that I'd like to read that kind of talk about this. The first one is references from history. The first one says, the Roman Church pushed itself into the place of the Roman world empire, of which is the actual continuation. The Pope is Caesar's successor. So even though pagan Rome kind of seized its power with the Caesars that were the rulers at the time, papal Rome had a very strong hold on Europe at the time through its religious means. So it had a very strong connection to all the kings, and they had a say in who could marry whom and so on. So they definitely had a very strong say in controlling the powers of Europe at the time. But it was very much for religious means, not political means as pagan Rome used to do it. So the second quote is, the mighty Catholic Church was little more than the Roman Empire baptized. Rome was transformed as well as converted. The very capital of the old empire became the capital of the Christian empire. The office of Pontifex Maximus was continued in that of Pope. So even though it seemed like it was under a different banner, they just changed the names and everything else kind of stayed the same. So Revelation 13:3 talks about how this beast received a deadly wound. Now, what happened to this power is that in 1798, there was a man by the name of, it was Napoleon's general actually, a man by the name of Alexander Berthier. He went into Rome and took the Pope captive, and the Pope actually died in captivity under this man. And from that point on, the papacy didn't have control over Europe anymore, which was the then known world at the time.
So that's 1798.
Yeah.
That would be then the end of the 1260 years.
Yes.
And if you then go back 1260 years, you come down to 538,
Yes.
which was the start of the papacy as a ruling body
yes.
within Europe.
Yes, exactly. That was following pagan Rome.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but it says in Revelation chapter 13, verse 3, that the deadly wound will actually be healed, and that the whole world will actually give homage to the beast, basically.
Yes.
So, if we're looking at the papacy in this day now, how much of an influence does it have? Is the question.
Yes.
And I think it's pretty obvious. I think he's probably one of the Pope at the moment is probably one of the most well-known people on the planet. Pope Francis I. The people see him as a very strong moral leader. Thousands of Catholics and non-Catholic people go to see him when he arrives in their country. And for the first time ever, he addressed the US Congress in 2015. That's never happened in history before. This is what an American ambassador said about the Vatican. It says it is unmatched as a listening post. So the papal structure is already prepared for worldwide control because it holds an audience of the political leaders of the planet.
Yes.
So clearly the wound is definitely healing, and we can see that the eyes of the nations are on the Pope, really. So we can definitely see he's getting his power back. So it does say that it would be a strong political power, and that it is a very powerful religious power, but it also says that he would be guilty of speaking blasphemy. So that's in verse 7. So what did it do basically to kind of speak in blasphemy?
Blasphemy. Okay, just a quick example of blasphemy. In Mark chapter 2, it talks about a number of, I think it was 4 men, they brought their friend to Jesus for healing. And when they arrived where Jesus was, there was a huge crowd. And whenever you read in the New Testament, when Jesus was out, there was always a big crowd. And these 4 men, they wanted to get their friend to Jesus for healing. So they actually took the tiles off the roof and lowered their friend down. And the Bible says, when the man was lowered down, Jesus said to this man, "Son, your sins are forgiven." And it tells us that the scribes and the Pharisees there said in their heart, "Who is this man? Only God can forgive sins." He's speaking blasphemy.
Yes.
And so we know that the blasphemy is when a man says he can forgive sins.
Yes.
Another one is in John chapter 10, and here Jesus has been doing some healing, and the scribes and the Pharisees want to stone him, and he said, basically says, "Oh, what have I done wrong?" And they said, "We don't want to stone you for the good works that you're doing of healing, what have you, but you being a man calling yourself God."
Yes.
So when a man calls himself God, or he says, "I can forgive sins," that's blasphemy.
Okay, so we definitely have 2 characteristics that define what blasphemy is, according to Jesus.
According to Jesus.
And that is that if you claim to be God, and if you claim to forgive sins, and it's very clear that the Roman Catholic Church claims both of these things. Okay, let's move on to this number the number of 666 now. Many people have many interpretations of what this number could be, but the official name of the papacy, or the name of the title of the Pope in Rome, is Vicarius Filidae, and it's actually Roman characters, and Roman characters have numbers attached to them. So if you actually add up each letter to its number, then and you add up all the different numerals, it comes to the number 666. So this is all another study for another day.
Yes.
So I think we'll probably go into more depth when we come to discuss that in more detail. But it isn't just us that claim to say this. It has been claimed and said before by the Protestant reformers and by other denominations.
Yes.
So I believe we have quotes here from those other denominations that kind of say that. Go right to the end. So this is from the Baptist Manual, and it was written in November.
Sunny,
Yes.
this is not somebody speaking. This is
No.
actually the manual that
Yes.
the Baptist Church
Used, yes, yeah. This is in. It's actually in a paper read before a New York ministers' conference, and it was in November 13, 1898. And this is what that said. It says, "There was and is a commandment to keep the holy Sabbath day, but that Sabbath day was not Sunday. It will be said, however, and with some show of triumph, that the Sabbath was transferred from 7th to the first day of the week. Where can the record of such a transaction be found? Not in the New Testament, absolutely not. There is no scriptural evidence of the change of the Sabbath institution from the 7th to the first day of the week." And that's a Baptist, that's actually in front of New York ministers in the Baptist Manual. The Catholic Church, in fact, claims and says it themselves. It says, this is James Cardinal Gibbons in the book The Faith of Our Fathers, 93rd edition, which was published in 1917. It says, "You may read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, and you will not find a single line authorizing the sanctification of Sunday. The scriptures enforce the religious observance of Saturday, a day which Catholics never sanctify." Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
There's another quote here from the Church of Christ. This was written by a man named Robert Milligan in the book Scheme of Redemption, page 165. It says, "Finally, we have the testimony of Christ on this subject. In Mark 2:27, he says, 'The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath.' From this passage, it is evident that the Sabbath was made not merely for the Israelites, as Paley and Hengstenberg would have us believe, but for man, that is, for the race." We read this passage earlier this week.
That's right.
And it never says that the Sabbath was made for the Jews.
No.
It actually, the verse itself says in Mark 2:27 that the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath, which is talking about mankind. It's not for the Jews. It continues to say, "Hence we conclude that the Sabbath was sanctified from the beginning, and that it was given to Adam and Eve in Eden as one of those primal institutions that God ordained for the happiness of all men." So it's not just for Jesus, for everyone.
And that's why we can have joy
Yes.
on the Sabbath,
Exactly.
because God made that.
For us.
And as we've seen when you looked on the second day on rest, it's not just the physical, it's the mental and the spiritual.
Yes, all the others, yes, absolutely. So this is from, next quote is from Dwight's Theology, Volume 4, page 401. It's a Congregationalist quote. It says, "The Christian Sabbath, Sunday, is not in the scriptures and was not by the primitive church called the Sabbath." So you can see here that again, this isn't something that's found in scripture at all. We'll go to an Episcopal quote. This is from a Religious Encyclopedia, Volume 3, page 2259. It says, Sunday, days solace of the Roman calendar, day of the sun, because it's dedicated to the sun, the first day of the week, was adopted by the early Christians as a day of worship. No regulations for its observance are laid down in the New Testament, nor indeed is its observance even enjoined. And the Lutherans, we know Martin Luther is one of the great reformers. This is quoted in a Catholic Sabbath manual. It says the observance of the Lord's Day, Sunday, is founded not on any command of God, but on the authority of the Church. That's Ansber's Confession of Faith that was quoted in the Catholic Sabbath manual. Again, the Methodists, this is what they say. Harris Franklin Rawle, Christian Advocate, July 2nd, 1942. He says, take the matter of Sunday. There are indications in the New Testament as to how the Church came to keep the first day of the week as its day of fellowship. But there is no passage telling Christians to keep that day or to transfer the Jewish Sabbath to that day. Isn't that so interesting?
It is interesting because when we looked on the first day, it said that God blessed the Sabbath day.
Yeah.
He set it apart, he made it holy. So if that day, that seventh day, is special because he blessed it, we wouldn't get a blessing on the other days.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. I'm just going to probably read two more quotes, one from the Presbyterians and one from the Pentecostals.
Yes.
This is T.C. Blake, D.D. Theology Condensed, page 474 and 475. So what the Presbyterians say, until therefore it can be shown that the whole moral law has been repealed, the Sabbath will stand. The teaching of Christ confirms the perpetuity of the Sabbath. I think we probably didn't look into this as much, but if people say that the Sabbath has been done away with, what about the rest of the commandments? Because yesterday we went through the whole law as being love and it being the foundation of God's government. So if you're saying that the Sabbath is not needed anymore, does that mean the other commandments are not, like to steal and to kill and to not commit adultery? Does that mean that none of that is needed anymore? Certainly not. I think we all know that that's something that we need ethically and morally to govern society now, in any country that you go to, any race or creed. And this is the last quote. This is from Pentecostal. It's the Pentecostal Evangel, written in August 9, 1959. It says, why do we worship on Sunday? Doesn't the Bible teach that Saturday should be the Lord's Day? Apparently, we will have to seek the answer from some other source than the New Testament.
Okay.
So again,
I think that's very clear.
Yeah, very clear.
You've made your point.
Yes. Yes. So it isn't just us who are saying this. This is said from many of the denominations in the Christian world.
Okay. So I'd like to just sort of go back to this 666 because it talks about the mark of the beast.
Yes.
But and the mark is a symbol of authority. Does God have a mark?
Yes, he does. I think we read this yesterday, didn't we? It was in Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 20, and in verse 12, yes. So I think because we've rinsed Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 20, we'll read the verse 12 today.
Okay.
Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 12.
Ezekiel 20 and verse 12. Moreover, also I gave them my Sabbaths to be a sign between me and them, that they might know that I am the Lord that sanctify them.
So, the Sabbath is a sign of God, between God and man.
Okay. Yeah. I was, from the sign, this mark, if it's a symbol of authority, if you think of the American seal,
Yes.
you know, it's the president, that's his title, it's got his name, so President Joe Biden and of the United States, so it's got his territory.
Yes.
Whereas we saw there in Exodus 20 and verse 11, chapter 20, verse 11, where it talks about God, and it says God, that's his
title,
and then it says Creator, that's what he does, and his territory is the heavens and the earth.
So he's the creator of the heaven, that's his title. But definitely, absolutely, it highlights all of those things. So there's also a couple other verses, Exodus chapter 31, verse 17. Exodus chapter 31, verse 17.
Verse 17. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made heavens and earth, and on the 7th day he rested and was refreshed.
So,
was refreshed. Yes.
Yes.
And that's what the Sabbath is about, isn't it? Yeah. A refreshing.
Yes.
A reset.
Exactly. So you pause, and then after that pause, you feel refreshed. And that's the whole idea. So again, here it's reiterating that the Sabbath is a sign between God and his people forever.
Yes.
Forever. It's not just for a specific amount of time, that's established forever. Romans chapter 4, this is in the New Testament. Romans chapter 4 and verse 11.
Romans chapter 4 and verse 11. And he received the sign of circumcision, a seal of the righteousness of the faith which he had yet being uncircumcised, that he might be father of all them that believed, though they be not circumcised, that righteousness might be imputed unto them also.
Okay, so you can kind of see here where sign and seal are used together. So actually, when God talks about a sign in the Bible, it's used quite easily between sign and seal. Yeah. So when it talks about that the Sabbath is going to be a sign, it could also be interpreted as it's a seal, as described here in Romans. So that's really what the sign and the seal of God is.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. I like that. So we've covered, we've looked at this mark of the beast, and clearly the mark or the seal, the sign of the beast is Sunday, as opposed to God, which is the Sabbath.
Yes, that's right.
And if we're keeping the Sabbath, the true Sabbath of God, that's the day we're going to get blessed.
Yes.
Whereas we're not going to get the same blessing.
No. No, definitely. So I think it's probably good to look at what the symbol or the mark of the beast's authority is. So I think the Roman Catholic Church of the Papacy speaks for itself regarding what they believe or what they think about the true Sabbath of God, which is on the 7th day of the week.
Okay.
So this is from a Catholic catechism, which is a book that is used to teach the youngsters of the Catholic Church. It's a doctrinal catechism that was published in 1874, and the question is asked. So the format is very like a Q&A.
Yes.
So they ask the question and then they answer it, and that's how they teach it to their students. So it says, have you any other way of proving that the church has power to institute festivals or precepts? And this is their answer in their catechism. It says, Had she not such power, she could not have done that in which all modern religionists agree with her. She could not have substituted the observance of Sunday, the first day of the week, for the observance of Saturday, the seventh day, a change for where there is no scriptural authority. This is them speaking. And they claim it themselves that it is they are the ones who changed it. It isn't. It's not founded on scriptural authority. The next, it says here, they are the ones who changed from Sabbath to Sunday. So it's very clear here, they're not hiding it.
No.
They're very open about it.
Yes.
Or well, they were. I don't think we can find any kind of books or quotes in recent times where they've claimed it, but we definitely can in history, because they have said it multiple times.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, that sounds interesting. With the Sabbath in obviously it's in the Ten Commandments. So is this the Catholic Church still keeping the Ten Commandments as they were, or?
Well, the little horn power is said to think to change times and laws. So it's not just the Sabbath that they've kind of changed, so to say. They've also changed the second one, which is the one to not have any.
The second command.
Yes.
It's Exodus chapter 20 and verse 2.
Yes.
Sorry, verse 4. Exodus 20 and verse 4. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water underneath the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, unto the third and the fourth generation of them that hate me.
Yes. So
it's quite a long
one, yes. Yeah, definitely. But I think it's important to God that we don't have any graven images. But as we know, the papacy has many different kind of forms of images that they worship. One of them including Mary, the Mother of God. So it's very clear that they have lots of saints that people worship. So it's not just about God. They have multiple images that they worship.
Okay. So is that then still in their Ten Commandments, or what's happened there? Do they now have only 9 commandments?
Yes, so they've taken that one out, so it no longer exists in their Bibles. So you will not find the second commandment in those Bibles.
Okay.
So yeah.
So there's only 9 commandments?
Yes. Well, according to them.
Well, because I think that
they've split.
we've got Catholic. Right.
Yes.
They split one.
Yes.
Which one's that?
I believe it's the 10th one. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So then, with what we have in the original 10 Commandments, the 4th commandment is now the 3rd commandment.
Exactly. And the 10th one has been split.
Split.
So there is, they do have the 10 commandments, but it's not what was originally written.
Fine. Okay, just in case there's any questions. And if you have any questions, please put them in, and even though the program may be finished, we will follow up, and if there are questions there, we're more than happy to answer.
Absolutely, yes. Do send your questions in, definitely. So I want to carry on reading from the Catholic Catechism, just to kind of see what they say. The question again is then asked, which is the Sabbath day? And the answer is Saturday is the Sabbath day. This is a quote from their catechism. And then the question is asked, why do we observe Sunday instead of Saturday? And the answer is, we observe Sunday instead of Saturday because the Catholic Church transferred the solemnity of Saturday to Sunday. So they themselves, again, claim that they are the ones who have done it. So, the papacy is strongly saying that they have done it. They're not trying to hide it at all.
Good. So how would you then bring this all together?
Yes. So I think it's very clear that the whole, everything that we've been talking about is in relation to worship,
Yes.
ultimately. Who are we going to worship? It's when you keep the Sabbath, you are worshipping Creator God who made the heavens and the earth. And when you receive His seal, you are affiliated with Him.
Yes.
Whereas when you observe the first day of the week as the Sabbath, you are associated with the Antichrist. You are associated with this beast power that has its authority that was given to it by the dragon. So there's a clear, distinct two sides.
Right.
And depending on the day that you choose to worship, you are picking two sides. You're picking a side, sorry.
Okay. So you're saying here that we may have to make a choice.
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely. Okay, so I think it's probably worth looking at what does God say about people who disobey Him, or
Yes.
what is God's warning against this kind of being led astray in this way. I've got a couple of passages here. Malachi chapter 2, verses 7 to 9.
So if you find Matthew, it's the book before Matthew.
Yep.
Matthew. The book before is Malachi.
Yep.
And chapter 2, and verse 8 and 9. But ye are departed out of the way. You have caused many to stumble at the Lord. You have corrupted the covenant of Levi, saith the Lord of hosts. Therefore have I also made you contemptible and base before all the people, according as you have not kept my ways, but have been partial in my law.
Yes. Isn't that interesting? I just love the last bit where it says you've been shown partiality in the law.
Yes.
So disobedience to God is a very serious thing. And I think we talked about this before. Why is the Sabbath so important and why is the law so important to God? Because obedience is associated with Him. If you love me, keep my commandments, which is found in John 14:15. The next passage is from Isaiah chapter 30, verse 9 and 10.
And we just need to let our Bibles open in the middle.
Yes.
Isaiah.
Isaiah chapter 30, verse 9 and 10.
That this is a rebellious people, lying children that will not hear the law of the Lord, which say to the seers, see not, and to the prophets, prophesy not unto us right things, speak unto us smooth things, prophesy deceit.
Exactly. So,
Scary.
yeah. So there are people out there who don't say truth for what it is. And I think a lot of things that we've probably said today have maybe come as a shock to many, or maybe come as being quite harsh to many.
Yes.
But actually what we're trying to say is that this is truth, and for God that matters. It's a big deal for Him. Because people who say false things or are deceitful, the Lord does not like it.
Yes.
He's not a fan of them. Zechariah chapter 7, verse 12.
In Zechariah is one of those very small back books. If you find the New Testament in Matthew, then before Matthew is Malachi, and then there's Zechariah. And Zechariah chapter 10?
7 and verse 12.
7 and verse 12. Yea, they made their hearts as an adamant stone, lest they should hear the law and the words which the Lord of hosts hath sent in His Spirit by the former prophets. Therefore came a great wrath from the Lord of hosts. hosts.
Yes. So again, God is here warning his people to
Don't make your heart stony.
Exactly, yeah. Don't turn your heart from the law of God, but to actually obey God's law. Because it's his words, ultimately, and it's coming from his spirit. So we must not harden our hearts to his spirit.
Yes.
Isaiah chapter 24, verse 4 to 6.
Isaiah 24.
Isaiah chapter 24, verse 4 to 6.
The earth mourneth and fadeth away, the world languishes and fadeth away, and haughty people of the earth do languish. The earth also is defiled under the inhabitants thereof, because they have transgressed the law, changed the ordinances, broken the everlasting covenant. Therefore hath the curse devoured the earth, and they that dwell therein are desolate. Therefore the inhabitants of the earth are burned, and few men left.
So those who change God's ordinances, their end is destruction, which is what this verse is saying. So, I mean, it's just a continuation of what we've been talking about.
Yes.
Disobedience to God leads to destruction. Two more verses and then we'll move on. Isaiah chapter 29, verses 10 and 11.
29, verse 10 and 11. For the Lord hath poured out upon you the spirit of deep sleep, and hath closed your eyes. The prophets and your rulers, the seers, he hath he covered. And the vision of all is become unto you as the words of a book that is sealed, which men deliver to one that is learned, saying, Read this, I pray thee. And he said, I cannot, for it is sealed.
Yes. So God will actually stop revealing the meaning of his word to you if you shut it off for long enough.
Okay. So that means I could still be reading the Bible, but I wouldn't understand it because it appears to be sealed, to be shut, to be closed.
Yeah. So it appears to be very hard to understand because they simply they don't want to hear what the truth is, and so God eventually will shut it off and they won't understand what they're reading, basically.
Thank you.
Ezekiel chapter 22, verses 26 and 31. Ezekiel chapter 22, verses 26 and 31.
Her priests have violated my law and have profaned my holy things. They have put no difference between holy and profane. Neither have they showed difference between unclean and clean, and have hid their eyes from my Sabbaths, and I am profaned among them. Verse 31. Therefore have I poured out my indignation upon them. I have consumed them with the fire of my wrath. Their own way have I recompensed upon their heads, saith the Lord God.
You can't get any more clear than that. No. I think that explains it really. So disobedience to God's Sabbath is disobedience to him, and he takes it very personally, and the end leads to destruction. So that's what the Bible has to say about disobedience and kind of going away from God.
So are you going to finish on a happy note?
On a happy note, yes, definitely. So I think what we need to remember, do we have time to go through where we receive Mark?
We've got about 5 minutes
left.
Okay,
okay. We'll probably need to go through it very, very quickly then. We want to know where this seal is going to be and where we receive Mark of the beast, because many people say it's a chip that you put in your skin or something along those lines, but we want to clarify. Yeah, or a seal on their head so you can kind of see it, when you're walking around. So is that what it's saying? Let's have a quick look at that. The forehead represents the mind, and that's found in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 16. So we'll quickly read that. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 16.
Hebrews 10 and verse 16. This is the covenant that I will make with them after those days, saith the Lord. I will put my laws into their hearts, and in their minds will I write them.
Exactly. So it's actually in their minds. So the forehead isn't necessarily plastered on their forehead. It's in their minds. Because what sits behind your temple is your brain.
Yes.
So that's where the law of God will be written. Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 10 talks about what the hand represents. Ecclesiastes chapter 9, chapter 9, verse 10.
Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 10. Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might. For there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave whither thou goest.
Exactly. So the hand is what you do. So I believe the mark of the beast is something that is will be on their hand and on their forehead. So not only will they accept it in their minds, but they will also accept it on their hands, or they'll just, in what they're doing, or they'll just accept it on their foreheads. The seal of God is just on their foreheads, which means that they will probably do
the decisions we make.
Exactly, that's exactly right. Okay, so as you said, let's finish on a high. What is Jesus saying to his people? I think is what we need to kind of go to. So John chapter 8, verse 12. John chapter 8, verse 12.
Then spake Jesus again unto them, saying, I am the light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. Amen.
Amen. So what Jesus is saying here is that if you're with me, then you will have joy. You will be not walking in darkness. You will have the light of life. So that's the promise that he's given to us, is that if we're affiliated with him, if we keep his Sabbath and we put God's mark on our foreheads, then he will protect us from whatever darkness or Lucifer or the dragon will have against us. God will protect us from it. So I believe that, there's so many positive benefits, and I think maybe in the next few weeks to months we can put up testimonies of what people have experienced about keeping the Sabbath, so that those of you who are watching us online, can actually see how keeping the Sabbath has blessed the Middlesbrough Church and the individuals that are in here. And I hope that we can probably talk about this in the future as well. But keeping the Sabbath definitely has a lot of benefits, and I'm sure that most people want rest and need rest in their life. So this is definitely something, a challenge for us to take up and kind of go ahead with it.
I'd like to thank Sunil for sharing with us over the last 4 days. It's been fascinating. And as rightly as Sunil said, this can only be the beginning.
Yeah.
There's other areas we need to explore. But if you have any questions, please put them in. Sunil, would you close in a prayer for us, please?
Absolutely. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we want to thank you for the last 4 days where we have been able to look into your word, look at what science tells us about keeping your Sabbath rest. We thank you for giving us this day of rest, a time where we can enjoy what you've created, to remember that you have given us so many promises, that you will keep us safe, and you will hold us in your presence, that you will be with us no matter what happens in life, that you are constantly there for us and want the best for us. Ultimately, Lord, that you want us to be together with you. I ask that as we move on from these talks, that those people who are watching will choose to accept, follow you, to listen to your word, to obey, but all ultimately to be blessed by the joys that can be brought on by keeping Sabbath. We ask that to be with the members of this church, and that we ask that you continue to be with us as we congregate together every Sabbath and worship you. We pray that you be with our hearts and our minds. Help your Lord to be written in our minds. so that we can do the right thing to bring glory to your name and ultimately bless those around us. Thank you again for all that you have done. I ask in Jesus' name.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us. It's been a pleasure.